Welcome to Savage Minds. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. Today's guest is Biljana Vankovska, a professor of political science, international relations, and peace studies at Cyril and Methodius University in Skopje, Macedonia. She is director of the newly established think tank Synergia Orbi, Institute for Global Analysis, and a member of the No Cold War Collective. She used to be a senior guest researcher at Copenhagen Peace Research Institute, a teaching staff member of the European Peace University in Schleining, Austria, and a senior research fellow at the Geneva-based Center for Democratic Control of the Armed Forces. She is a regular syndicated columnist for Globetrotter Media, an author at Substack, and a contributor to Savage Minds. I welcome Biljana Vankovska to Savage Minds. I would like to start off talking about everything, and so we'll be here until we die, because the world situation is becoming increasingly of concern to both of us. But every world expert, everyone on both sides of the aisle, expresses both concern and consternation about the Strait of Hormuz debacle. It becomes quite clear that in the Middle East, the U.S. has lost. And the U.S. is now trying to shore up its reputation, but we can see them. They can't pretend anymore. How do you interpret what has gone on with Iran, even from a purely mediatic perspective?
Iran is, of course, one of the greatest concerns for the Iranians, first of all. Let's not forget them, because usually we, the analysts, look at countries and nations, from this bird's eye perspective and try to analyze and to make them objects of analysis. So yes, Iranian people have suffered a lot, not only during this war that started at the end of February, but for decades. On the other hand, we see that their problems are now global problems only because they were pushed back to the wall and didn't see any other option than to manage their advantage over the Hormuz Strait. So I would not blame them for doing that when on the other side they have the superpower, the military superpower, and the regional military power like Israel. So this, self-defense, it is actually, according to the international law, it is a self-defense, legitimate one, has provoked many things that were below the surface of the changing world, as we usually say. So now Iran is really a problem or a concern for each of us, for every country in the world, starting from China up to my Macedonia or Latin America or North America. So we see how the world has been interconnected, but the superpower thinks only through its own interests, of course. And now they feel the setback because they dehumanize, first of all, the opponents. The Iranians were always presented as mullah regime and dictatorship and, all the worst possible attributes were related to Tehran governance and Iran as a country. And now it is also a little bit funny to see them surprised that these people are brave and that they have a state, they have defense forces, they have courage to oppose the great military power. And that affects not only United States and, as you mentioned, their reputation, their authority, their belief in their omnipotent position in the world, but they affect the world as well. So maybe Iran, I wish them all the best, for the people. But maybe this struggle is also some sort of a turning point for a new global order, because we have to start somewhere. We are always talking, BRICS, multipolarity, and many other notions about the New World Order. But nothing has been so dramatic so far until the Iran war. Iran maybe represents a revolutionary turning point. I hope that something good may come out of this tragedy. It is a tragedy. Any war conflict that takes innocent lives of school children and the rest of the population is horrible. But on the other hand, there must be some turning point, some moment when some people of power would say enough is enough. And we have to deal with Iran and also with the rest of the world, with the less powerful countries, in a more respectful way, let's put it, in a more cooperative way. So Iran is actually, in my view, it may sound radical, but in my view, Iranians are struggling for their own freedom, but also for our global emancipation from the empire of evil, I would say, and its ally in the region, Israel, that is still involved in a genocide. I can hardly even express my anger and rage over the fact that we are in the middle of a genocide that lasts more than 1,000 days. I stopped counting anymore. So we have these two open wounds not far from the place where you and I sit right now, Gaza and Iran. And even though I don't have a magical formula or a solution to propose, but I believe that once United States realize that they have lost both in Ukraine, don't forget that it is a military failure in Ukraine, and in Iran. So they're losing wars, even though they are the most powerful force. So we can open here the questions of the impotence, actually, of the military power. They rely the most on the military supremacy. And in reality, on the ground, we see that countries like Iran, even Palestinians, I would say, I don't know how they survive, but they do, and they resist. And they show such stamina that is incredible, that be remembered in history, I believe. So the military power is definitely not the way how to govern the world. I don't know how much longer this all will take. That is the only thing that is bothering me, and how many lost lives will be in the process. But somehow the only hope is that the final outcome will be the birth of a new world order, let's put it. Because I usually want to quote Gramsci, as many others, of course, that this is time of monsters, when the old system is dying and the new is trying to be born. Maybe this is a situation in which we are witnessing this painful birth of the new world. It takes long, it is very painful, it's unpredictable even, but we have no choice. Otherwise, we should all capitulate and say, okay, fine, this new neo-Nazi regime is dominant and we should just obey. Resistance is futile, the famous phrase.
We're seeing, in fact, so many changes that I would not have even predicted, given Trump's persona in recent weeks. He's looking a bit like Oliver going up for more porridge. We're seeing a shift in power between China and the US, between Russia and China and the US. I'm very both shocked at the velocity of which this has all taken place, since think of what was going on at the beginning of January with our kidnapping of Maduro. And at the same time, yeah, I have to admit a bit of schadenfreude, because this is to be expected, but it's also in a way pleasant to see things unraveling for the countries. It's my own country, but I, like many Americans, do not agree at all with what we have done. Another thing that has occurred here, and this is something that I started to witness just before lockdown, I think dealing with the gender wars, I saw a lot of how people on the right were more analytical, more liberatory. They spoke out about the injustices they saw, to include even homophobia within that set of ideologies. But during lockdown, I started to see this fragmentation of the binary, or the traditional binary, of left and right. And I think the new global order isn't only coming in the sense of BRICS, that too. It's not only coming in the form of the de-dollarification of the petrol industry, let's say, or just the de-dollarification in general, but I also think that the US hyper-imperialism has gone so fast that now Iran brilliantly strategized, even on social media, its position. It's basically repeated the same sentiments that many in the global south at the UN have been saying for decades, okay? This hyper-imperialist phase has been the calling card of the US, and now we have a president who made his name on doing the deal. He got into office because of his reality TV show persona in large part, but he can make a deal happen. Let's vote for him because he'll make it happen. Ironically, he's failed to make deals. In fact, we're seeing that he has no power at all. So you've argued in the past that the US survives through a state of permanent war. Now that it's clear that that strategy is failing, how does the current hyper-imperialist phase differ from previous eras of US hegemony, particularly in its treatment of peripheral states like those in the Balkans, and even some in the global south that are not what were previously called third world, but have enormous power nonetheless?
First of all, when we mention Trump, there is a trap. We should be very cautious about, focusing on this personality that really manages to take our attention, to make us nervous and angry with the American voters that actually gave him.
I have been constantly emphasizing, even with writers, we cannot make this about Trump or Trump derangement syndrome, because if you really want to have an argument, I'll take you back to Obama and Clinton. This idea that somehow they were better and less colonial, less imperialist is a myth, complete myth. I mean, NATO much during Clinton? That was insane. And the same thing for his wife as the Secretary of State. The violence that she directly authored in Honduras, in Libya, are for the history books. So I think that I agree with you, there's a trap in focusing on his persona, but I'm pointing to this irony of that he was the art of the deal. I met him when I was 20. He had just written Art of the Deal. I worked in a bookstore. He came to sign books, and my task was to display the books. I did this, and there he was. And the funny thing is there's no deal anymore. He has no cards left. It's almost as if the events in Iran, even more than in Venezuela, demystified that American power. What is the future for what is now the military-industrial media academic complex when you've got a burgeoning source of independent media out there? Americans and people around the world, for longer than Americans, have seen that the U.S. is a bullying state that makes one rule for itself and its BFFs. All the others have different rules. You often, in fact, critique the term rules-based order as a euphemism for U.S. diktat. But at the same time, we're seeing it right before our eyes. We knew this decades ago, but now everyone is seeing right before their eyes that specific international law frameworks are arbitrary when it comes to the U.S. and Western order. So what is your take on this in terms of the BRICS as an alternative or any kind of alternative to the MIMAC trap?
So many of our colleagues are actually trying to find a solution and to find, the diagnosis, prognosis, and then therapy for this rotten global system or world that is approaching the edge of the abyss. And they find the easiest way by arguing that it is all about the elites. If good people are running the world, everything will be different and better and just and, cooperative. And I don't believe that kakistocracy is the problem. The fact that the worst, the least honorable people or educated people are running the most of the these leading powers, especially United States, of course, but also Europe, because I, as somebody who is a leftist, starts from the systemic point of view. And I'm glad that you mentioned the hyper-imperialism. It is the problem. The system of capitalism that is declining, that is going down into one of its worst crises ever. It goes, as Marx used to say, this moment of incredible development of production forces, technology, the digitalization, and everything actually that could provide for better lives for the people around the world, but are concentrated in the hands of few. And you mentioned rightly the Trump's visit to Beijing, and we saw how the corporate power looks. One madman, insane or incapacitated man, old man who doesn't know where he is and to whom he is talking or what is said to him. I bet that he did not grasp the messages he got from President Xi Jinping, but also the 40 most powerful and richest people in America. So that is the face of America today, not the ordinary people, not democracy. There is no democracy in that country. It is the opposite of democracy. So what shall we do? The same situation, as you mentioned, is to be found in Europe, unfortunately. Some of our friends and colleagues believe that Europe is something special, that we should save Europe because it has so much potentials and history and civilizational dimension that we should all talk about reviving Europe. No, Europe is also a victim, but also perpetrator of this hyper-imperialism, of course, in a rather colonial style, but now Europe is the vassal of United States. So that is clear. Europe is lost. It doesn't have independence. And then it is like a infection, like some kind of cancer that is spreading all over the world. But whenever I go to China, for example, and I see the world from a different perspective, from the other side of the planet, I find myself that I think as a Westerner who is depressed, who has lost hope, who always thinks about worst case scenarios. We are not even aware that we have lost our ability to think in constructive way, in revolutionary way, in practical way, how to oppose, how to resist this system that is actually taking our integrity, our dignity, our human rights, and that we become slaves of this corporate invisible power. But when you go on another side of the planet, you find people that live in optimism, they do have future, and they look at the world through different lenses. So I always mention that we should open this dialogue in order to see that other world is possible. And one of the lessons, actually, one of the messages from the two meetings that President Xi Jinping had recently, first with Trump and then with Putin, showed that different foreign policy is possible. They have already proved that different political system, social system is possible. The socialist system with Chinese characteristics, as they put it. Now they prove that even in an unstable world and terrifying situation, they can approach things from a different perspective. It was amazing to see the Chinese president so calm talking to Donald Trump. And it is a miracle that Donald Trump showed a dose of civility. It is unbelievable that the man that is so arrogant and odious in the White House, where he humiliates every single guest that entered there, all of a sudden was like a pupil, like a child. He, as I said, I doubt that he has intellectual capacity to understand what was said there. But it is important that we, the rest of the world, we watched closely, we listened, we saw the difference in the way of communication. And I hear... I don't want to be misunderstood. Of course, that we can talk about China in critical terms in various aspects, but one should be really, really wise and prudent to deal with Donald Trump, or actually with corporate America, with the privatized state, with huge nuclear and other potentials military to destroy the world, to talk in such a way to show softness, but also the resoluteness, and to say, this is our red line. No step further. We are not going to tolerate it. The first war, let's say under quotation marks, led between the United States and China was just months ago over the tariffs. And the United States got no from Beijing. So let's put these things together. It is always easy to, because yes, you are right that so many things are happening at the same time. So while we are watching at one thing, another thing is ongoing. But in global terms, on one hand, you have Iranians saying no to Trump and fighting back. Palestinians endurable things, and you have the Chinese in a calm way saying, no, you're not going to go your way. We can find, how they put it, constructive strategic stability formula. The same thing or similar thing we can add here about the dialogue or the quality of the dialogue between Putin and Xi Jinping. Here, I also don't take sides. I don't speak in normative terms. We can say also many things against Putin and war in Ukraine and all that. But, just imagine that the American presidents would visit China 25 times in a row, so and develop such a level of cooperation like today we see between China and Russia. Just imagine for a second. This is just, of course, theoretical possibility, maybe science fiction. But it is how the world can be built on trust, mutual benefit, or as Chinese say, win-win situation. And I believe that is the only way. But there is hope. On one field, Americans get this negative from Iran, from Ukraine, of course, from inside the society. We should not underestimate the social bomb, let's put it that way, that is ticking in the American society, that is deeply divided, that is polarized, that I'm afraid you're right when you say there is no right and left, there are no ideological or other, how to say, options and alternatives and deliberations about the future of America, or different America. But we have to hope and to believe that American people are not stupid, and that at one point they will also resist the corporate power that is exploiting them and pushing them to the disaster.
I wanted to address some of the things, though, that you've just mentioned, because since 2022, Russia, Ukraine, which has been quickly turned into evil Russia, innocent Ukraine. And if you follow the politics, which I'm sure you do in Ukraine, you're seeing that every day there are citizens documenting the kidnapping of Ukrainian men forcibly being conscripted into that army. Yet all of Western media, legacy media, is portraying Russia as this evil demonic force. Ukraine, of course, very good. Zelensky's a saint. Ha ha ha. And it's been all about modeling his persona. It makes me think a lot of Max Weber and even Georg Simmel's work on persona in politics, and the idea of the role of Western media in recent years, I would argue since 9/11 for sure, has been that of carrying water, in the sense a Politburo for the voices in power. You've described the situation in Gaza as the ultimate exposure of Western moral bankruptcy. How has the West's support for Israel permanently damaged the EU's normative power in the eyes of the global South? And I would piggyback onto that the Russia-Ukraine war and the fact that the U.S. had a huge hand from 2014, Victoria Nuland, in creating that situation and feeding, basically, it's a proxy war. It's not Russia-Ukraine. It's Russia-Ukraine, in parentheses, U.S., Britain, etc.
If you ask me to talk from a perspective of global South, I practically feel as a part of that global majority, only because of my former Yugoslav upbringing and, belonging to the so-called third world. And when you mention Gaza and how the global South looks at the Western moral bankruptcy and all that, it is an old story for all of us. We grew up with, the story of liberation of all colonized people all around the world, from the British Empire and then the other empires of European origin or American now. So it is not a surprise. Also, as we make this mistake, not we, but the media actually present that as a dominant narrative, that the Ukraine war started 4 years ago, blah, blah. The same applies to Palestine. It started actually Nakba in 1948. It was practically at the time when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations were adopted. It is such an irony, And if you ask me, I have enough years to recall that in my school years, we grew up with seeing news about Palestine, about the African countries, liberation movements, and all that, due to Tito's good relationship with all these leaders. Yasser Arafat was a hero in my days. Also Che Guevara, or Castro, Raul Castro, and all that. So there is no disappointment nowadays. It is what we want to say to the rest of the Western world. See, we were right. We knew, we were telling you so, but you believed in your righteousness, in your special mission to make us civilized. And I think that the European Union is doing what European countries, the colonizers, used to do many centuries ago, under a new name, under a new cover and new brand. What is nowadays seen as European soft power, or I don't know, even European integration, is a new form of neo-colonialism. So we, coming from the European periphery in the Balkans, mostly, feel that, and we are aware of that. But the new generations, my students, have no clue about this prehistory. They believe, they really take European Union as something religious, something that should, as a dogma, something you should never question or put into this context of moral bankruptcy. That is a very sad story, because I'm, of course, growing older and older. I won't be around too long, but the new generations will have to face the real picture about European Union. That is actually, how to say, trying to whitewash its bad history. And now they are actually helping create a new episode of fascism, of Nazism, of colonialism, as I mentioned. So Ukraine is nothing for them. They use Ukraine as a battlefield. They use young Ukrainian men and women as cannon fodder. They're expendable lives. And of course, when you mention Europe vis-a-vis Gaza, Israel, and Ukraine, it is normal to speak about double standards, about hypocritical, crying over the destiny of white-skinned, blue-eyed Ukrainians, and on the other hand, not to even mention the suffering of the Palestinians. So I don't think that Europeans changed at all. The format, the media narrative, the presentation of the good force for good, or even peace force. European Union is known as a peace project. And but I don't believe in that. First of all, they never faced the past, the horrible past and the consequences left behind them in Africa, in Latin America, wherever they went, including China. They never said, we regret what we did. They never even engaged into some sort of reconciliation. Here, just a footnote that I simply cannot understand the Japanese people not even mentioning Hiroshima and Nagasaki and playing good friends with United States. It's unbelievable what people can intentionally forget or try to erase from the memory. Because the logic of a normal, a rational person would be, we should learn from history, not to repeat it again. But obviously Hegel was right, and we learn nothing from history. So the European Union is entering into a new episode of how to say, proto-fascism, or looking at Germany is enough. You mentioned the forceful conscription of Ukrainian youth, but what's going on in Germany is also scary. They are trying to introduce conscription. They're building up the most powerful military force in Europe. That is at least the plan of the German government. So they already have this position of dominant economic power within the European Union. And now they want to transform it into a military power, while the economy is going downhill in deindustrialization and social crisis, and all these troubles are growing. It is really something that probably resembles, because we were not born then, the early stages of growing fascism. And when we nowadays wonder, how was it possible that some people trust Hitler? And he was popular, he was supported, he got on power through legitimate methods of democracy. He was not someone who grabbed and kidnapped power. And nowadays we see Trump and other people of different appearance or different sort, but it's a 21st century, so they cannot be the same, of course. Still, it is puzzling that people can be seduced or obedient and not to see the truth. But here, yes, there is this this density of events that make people scared, and it is governance by fear. It's fear mongering. When ordinary person who struggles to survive or to bring a bread at home, to secure the family life or whatever, and you cannot expect him or her to be activist, to be revolutionary, or somebody who is going to be active, through this transformative politics. I have full understanding of that. And then there is escapism of person that is under stress, under all these troubles around the world says, oh, I cannot bear watching Palestinian children or Ukraine or Iran or whatever happening in the world. Let's go to watch football, to go to musical concerts, Eurovision. Let's not forget that stupid thing that is even unbelievable that took place during genocide, and Israel almost won on that contest. So it is very hard to really cope. I think often that probably what we are experiencing nowadays, or these last years, let's say, is something that the intellectuals in the early 20th century went through. They probably were as desperate as we are today. They could not prevent the wars. I don't know if we can change something in that respect, but obviously we are failing because the genocide is ongoing, new wars are ongoing, and Cuba is probably the next target of United States. I don't know. So I don't know. I only accumulate the problems and I don't give clear answers, of course. But on the other hand, let's mention Gramsci again. We can be pessimists because of our intellect, because our analytical capacities, and not being seduced by the Western legacy media and their stories. So on one hand, we can be pessimistic about the state of affairs, and of course, to be desperate about the human suffering. I strongly oppose these analysts, our colleagues, who want us to eliminate emotions from the discourse. I don't know if it's female stuff or just the human stuff, but I do believe that we as human beings have emotions and we have to use them in order to wake up the people around us, to make them aware of the suffering that is ongoing in the world. And we do that by using emotions, of course, because when I see someone suffering, I suffer too. Not in the same way, but I get desperate because I am powerless. I can change their destiny, but I fight. And here Gramsci comes again with the second half of that his sentence. I am optimist because of my political will not to capitulate. So we have, and when I accepted to talk with you, it was, and I'm sure when you invited me, we both shared that idea that this is also one way in which we oppose the dominant narratives of mainstream media. So we are using these podcasts and Substack or whatever means we have to talk, to write, to say that different world is possible, that this is unacceptable, what's going on, and that we should all try to unite over some basic goals and fight against. I am also, I'm not sure, coming from the so-called peace research, but lately I'm getting more and more angry, more and more impatient, and I even have some intellectuals disagreements with some of my friends in terms of, believing in peaceful conflict resolution. I don't believe that it is always possible. Sometimes, as Iranians show us well, one should resist in a different way.
I also agree with what you've said about rethinking peaceful resistance. I've become very angry watching the genocides in Sudan and Palestine. It's horrific to me to think that we have, on the one hand, this movie industry that produces films like Shoah, Schindler's List. We're supposed to learn from history, but in reality, on the other hand, no one really gives a shit. And this is the kind of pessimism of power that I can understand that we need to fight against. Gramsci did not believe in a blind or naive, passive political optimism, but he viewed standard political optimism as a dangerous illusion that breeds political paralysis. At the same time, he argued that a serious political actor is beholden to balance two seemingly contradictory mindsets. And I think it's really important that we must be, on the one hand, realistic and ruthlessly so, as Gramsci advocated, and on the other, we have to be able to analyze, not sugarcoat the situation. And then, of course, he wrote a lot on optimism of the will, the unyielding action that is before us. And I find myself struggling with optimism. I think since lockdown, I have been foisted into this very strange reality, both here in Italy with the horrific lockdown measures, in my personal life, being gaslit in my own life. And then, my gosh, with what happened with Ukraine, I couldn't believe it, Biljana, when the media was writing stories, presenting news stories as this is Ukraine, without mentioning this is a proxy war. And that's a problem for me, because we have done this throughout our history. The United States is a country that has executed one proxy war after another, if not direct interventionism. I lived in Central America. I had contra bullets shot at me. I was part of the Sandinista revolution, and proudly so. But I find this very disturbing that now people carrying water for the US are legacy media, and I include the BBC in this. If I were still living in England, I didn't own a TV, but I would probably go out and buy a TV just to protest the TV license fees that those people pay. And they should not pay it. They're being propagandized completely. We're being taught that the history of Ukraine and Russia is actually not as it actually happened. We're being taught that Gazans and Hamas are terrorist groups, the washing and rinsing of this narrative over and over with Iran. What saved Iran in this, however, this is my theory, is just, first, the U.S. didn't know what it was getting into, in large part because people in the White House, and I don't mean just Trump, people on all levels of power were very ignorant as to Iran's very rich cultural, political history.
Exactly.
How can you go to toe-to-toe with such a country? They haven't read one of the most beautiful books. I used to teach it to my students, the Shahnameh, which is an epic. It's a beautiful story of this country that everyone in the Pentagon should have read first. They're dealing with a very rich and long heritage of a people who know who they are. The United States and Americans do not know who they are because their number one war domestically is keeping them out. And I'm thinking, what an irony. A country built on immigration is now trying to set the stakes on who can and who can't come out.
Life is full of ironies, and I don't know what to add to your elaboration. I fully agree. It is unbelievable, but at the same time, so understandable. Because, nothing happens all at a sudden, even though it may shock us to wake up in the morning and to hear that something happened that we did not expect. But as social scientists, we know that the seeds of these tendencies, of this situation, have been there for a long time, but people like these policymakers and decision makers, they don't care about that. And of course that they don't care about civilizations. See, what is civilizational achievement of America? I'm not, maybe some people will get angry. I come from a country that was born 35 years ago after fall of Yugoslavia. So who am I to speak about civilization coming from the Balkans? Because we at the Balkans were also an object of, this demonization, and we are still actually looked at as people who are primitive, who are militant, who don't know about decency, and I mean, I've heard so many things like that since Yugoslavia fell apart, and it is painful for somebody who was born in a country with dignity, with even courage to launch the non-aligned movement. With as I mentioned, the countries of the third world and the poorest countries, and to say no in the United Nations. So all that is gone, and the young generations brainwashed to believe into European bright future. They don't see that the military uniforms have been already tailored for them. I usually make my students read more Remark, for example, or at least watch the film, even though it's too long for them, 3 hours, all calm at the Western Front. So we are going all around this story, what could have been done, what should have been done, or what is to be done right now. As I mentioned, one would ask, United States are celebrating the 250th anniversary of their existence this year. So what is their achievement, civilizational achievement? Once ago, they used to preach, especially in the Balkans, in the territory of former Yugoslavia, their melting pot, the ability to create a nation, to actually they even engineered nations in my region, these nation building, state building processes, and they would usually mention their fantastic melting pot, the people that came from different parts of Europe or elsewhere, all of a sudden became throughout time this glorious nation. But that glorious nation was built on a genocide of indigenous people that live there. So they tend to forget that. Of course, that is not part of their jubilant year. So nobody is going to talk about the sacrifice of all the people that they eliminated, over 10 millions, if I'm not wrong. So talking about the West is really a bloody story, and talking, as you mentioned rightly, from a perspective of Latin America and the open veins of Latin America, and the suffering and colonization, exploitation, and even now they dare speak about Don Rome doctrine. It is all ours. It is in our backyard. It belongs to us. I mean, these people are crazy. They should really use this year to buy some mirrors and to look at their faces and their history and what are their achievements in the military technology and security apparatus and things like that. And yes, you're so right, talking about their inhumane treatment of all the people that come as migrants, not because they want to leave their countries, but because of necessity. And now they're treated as mentally ill or criminals or drug dealers. So it is such a horrible way of systematic demonization of entire regions, nations. So once you strip them of their human dignity and present them as a legitimate target for their interventions, the majority tend to say, okay, maybe they're just doing their job and they're protecting us.
I wanted to turn towards some of these issues we've been talking about, but in terms of the EU militarization, you mentioned Germany. I've been alarmed by this. I spoke to friends of mine in Germany. They're not. And I found myself thinking, do I have to remind my friends what happened in their country 80 years ago? I mean, it seems to be self-evident that we ought not to be encouraging Germany to be remilitarizing, and that started about a decade ago as well. Why has this been allowed? And I agree with you that it's not just Kallas and von der Leyen, although I have particular ire for von der Leyen, given that she's not an elected official. She has power that has been granted her beyond her weight, and that should be concerning to everyone in the EU. But I am very concerned that now young men in Germany who are perhaps wanting to study physics in Sweden or politics in California are being told that they have to get approval before they can leave the country. This is crazy and it's frightening.
I agree. It's affecting, first of all, the young people. And on the other hand, we have to say something positive, that there were protests, that young people and not so young came out, got out on the streets to protest these conscription plans and curtailing their freedom of movement and everything else. And of course, the huge investment in military industry and transformation of factories that produce cars and now to produce tanks, which is idiotic thing, even from a military point of view, because it's a waste of money. But still, there is also this unfinished business, I would say, with the legacy of the Second War, and the feeling of probably, how to put it, collective guilt. Or I don't believe in collective guilt. I never want to judge people as collectivity and to say, I don't know, the Russians are bad, or the Germans are bad, or the Serbs are bad, whoever, even the Americans. We all deserve to be treated as individuals, and even international law is based on that principle, that there is individual guilt and responsibility. So we should be clear about that. But on the other hand, there is this general atmosphere, and probably, as I said, unfinished business with, admitting that crimes were horrible, the Holocaust was horrible, and that the idea at the end was never again, but not only never again to the Jews, but never again to anybody, to anywhere in the world. So it is somehow they reduced this lesson learned, let's say, or half learned, only to the Jews. I have also communicating with some of German colleagues, and there are problems, even when I talk to leftists, for example. I got into a problem with their position. At the beginning, it was Ukraine, when I was cautious, and actually from the first moment on, I was mentioning the word proxy war. And they were very angry with me, leftists. So we have to this Vietnam syndrome and Vietnam moment, how to put it. We have to stand with people that are fighting for their freedom. They have right to self-defense and all that. And I would just say, yes, of course, but just make two step backwards and see the historical context, the background, who pushed Ukraine into this war, and what was going on during this Minsk agreement charade was going on. And the Russian population that was discriminated and even physically eliminated. Over 14,000 people were killed between 2014 and 2022. But nobody cared about that. So I had this problem with my German colleagues. Recently, a serious problem occurred with another leftist from Germany who argued that the West did a mistake, that didn't support enough the democratic forces in Iran to topple down the mullah regime. And then I was also trying to give some historical context to that it is not the job of the German left to help regime changes around the world. It is a matter for the Iranian people to do so, and that I am absolutely sure that they are capable of doing so. But they were always under these harsh sanctions and blockades. They could not leave the country. They were out of all financial transactions and the global economy. And actually a rich country made poor by intention, by design. So I don't know, the Germans behave strangely, unfortunately, and Germany is too important country for Europe, I'm afraid, still. And I would very much recommend a fantastic book by my Greek colleague who teaches in London, Kostas Lapavitsas, The Left Case Against European Union. It was published a few years ago. It's a brilliant, not too long book that explains his analysis is from a point of view of political economy, and he deconstructs the distribution of economic power and actually, how to put it, imperialism within the European Union. So the Germany is, on the top, exploiting the other countries for its own benefit, and that European Union is not actually a happy family and, all these blah, blah normative values. And Ursula, of course, is a product of that society. So in his book, actually, he argued that I think that the book was written sometime around Brexit or Brexit aftermath. So actually he argues that leaving European Union is not such a bad idea after all, because European Union is not what it presented itself to be, even from economic point of view.
You're listening to Savage Minds. If you're enjoying the show, take a second to subscribe at savageminds.co. Feel free to comment below or drop us a line to share your thoughts. Support independent media today. Now, let's get back to it. I agree with him on that point. I voted against Brexit, and then my views over time very quickly actually shifted because I saw, and I'm still seeing even from now, Italy, the benefits of a Brexit or an Italexit, as it were. I do think the European Union is posing more problems now, especially when we start to look at the working class, the middle class that is dissolved since lockdown for sure. I'm also most concerned about this pushing of militarization that is being completely opposed around the Mediterranean, Spain, Portugal, even France, Italy. But Germany is this special case. And it makes me wonder, what are people not learning from history? I'm not trying to insinuate that there's an inner Nazi gene or something like that. But I do think that Germany has not dealt with its own problems historically of racism. I don't think a few Holocaust films or the Nuremberg trials was enough. Because when I lived in Berlin and there was no housing, I had to take 6-month contracts. Well, I can't do that with children. You can't move across the town and have your school on the other side. It's not tenable. So I had to leave Berlin, and all my friends there, and they were Germans, saying, do not go because there are Nazis and neo-Nazis around the country. And I hand waved that thinking, oh, they're just exaggerating. Oh no, I would find out soon when I lived in Wuppertal, our flat, our neighbor, the building was empty except for them. And I found out soon why. They were neo-Nazis. And the instruments within Germany to help with an anti-Semitic attack, as we had happened to us, were, I will just say, underwhelming. For one word. They have all the tickets, the names, the websites, the ostensible power institutionally, but in reality, no power, none. Again, I think that there are serious problems around this, and it's, of course, hard for institutions to have the power of the police, but it was very frightening. And it's what, in the end, led me to leave Germany. I don't think it's enough to only hinge ourselves upon Nuremberg or upon the fact that Germany did not have an active army for so many years, or that now the conscription, it's not even overtly a conscription is what my friends in Germany tell me. It's not worrisome. I'm like, no, this is the slippery slope of conscription. It begins with, it's mandatory, but only to sign up. Don't worry. And then tomorrow it will be, you're being called in for a uniform fitting. I'm not really convinced about the EU's militarization at present. And in fact, you've noted that the EU has transformed from a peace project into NATO's civilian wing. Can the EU survive as an independent political entity, or is it just a de facto vassal state of the Pentagon?
Oh, that is a very good question. And a friend of mine from Substack uses a very new word, saying vassalize, vassals and allies together. A new combined mixed word. That is the position of European Union. Impotent. I mean, they I'm talking about elites and some people that believe in the stories, in fairy tales, that they're the best part of the world with such a wonderful art, literature, history, achievements, and all that. And they cannot imagine that the world should not start with European culture and all that. But on the other hand, they are nowadays really impotent, and we saw some interesting scenes in the Oval Office, these European leaders sitting like small children in front of Trump. Completely persona that we described at the beginning of our talk. So then we saw Ursula von der Leyen accepting the unacceptable deal over tariffs at a private golf mansion of Donald Trump in Scotland, if I'm not wrong. And she behaved in such a disgusting and humiliating manner. I mean, that's not Europe that is inspiration anymore. And it is like an old lady that used to be beautiful and attractive and all that, but nowadays it's just a shadow of itself. So well, it exists. I'm not sure even about NATO. And then, of course, European Union and NATO are now like Siamese twins. You never know in which capacity Macron, for example, or the German chancellor, or whoever you take from the European leaders, sits at some forum. Is it representing a NATO member state or European Union member state? Because in theory, they should be different organizations. It is what I used to teach at the university. This is a military alliance. It has different rules, different institutional structure, role, functions, and all that, while European Union is a peace project. But nowadays, European Union is also dreaming about how to quote Kaya Kalla's idiotic statement about how shall we defeat China if we are incompetent in dealing with Russia? So she's such an idiot who believes that European Union should first defeat Russia and actually decompose this huge, she probably doesn't know the territory of Russian Federation, how big it is, and how hard it would be to decompose a country like that. And then she has even wider ambitions to defeat China. I mean, this is like comedy. This is at the same time tragic and really comedian stuff. But I'm afraid that is very bad news for our young generations. And I usually want to make them, not to believe in fairy tales, especially when they are cooked up by politicians, by elites, and by the ones who are making their military uniforms already. So we I don't know, if we talk about the existence of Europe is a continent, of course, and nobody knows its real geographical scope. Is Russia part of Europe or not? Is Turkey part of Europe or not? We can open many dimensions about what Europe is. But if we talk about European Union, I don't think it has a bright future. So probably in this context, I'm coming from a country that is stuck somewhere on this enlargement process. And there is a huge, feeling of desperation, of disappointment that we are knocking on the door and the door is closed and that we have to fulfill this and that requirements and all that. And there is a sincere feeling that we are, in such a desperate situation that we even feel sorry for ourselves. I'm trying to say that may not be bad news to be out of the European Union, especially, it looks like a divorce when children are involved, or property, or we know as mature women, we know how it looks like. So, dissolution of European Union would not be a very beautiful scene to watch. So it will be probably some I don't know, divorce saga. But on the other hand, because we have to think even in this constructive way to find solutions, not only to detect the problems, I start to believe in sovereignty. That the key for rejuvenation of democracy, first of all of democracy, comes, from local communities, let's put it that way, or state level. If we are not able to develop some sort of just system of democratic rights or freedom of dignity of human beings in our own state, how can we expect that this situation would be better on the level where Kaja Kallas is leading the foreign policy, or Ursula is the chief of I don't know what European Commission? So yes, we have lost not only on a personal level self-respect and self-confidence that we can do better and we should try to do better, but also on this national level there is a feeling, I don't know how it looks from a perspective of member states, you can know that much better than me, but I'm telling you how people from these countries that are on the path to join European Union, hoping to do so. So they have completely lost the compass and the self-confidence and believe that that they have responsibility before their children to do something, first of all, in their own city or their own municipality or your own state. So everything is somehow related. Let's hope for the European Union to save us. It is not going to save anybody because it is running into a disaster. And if they get really involved into Ukraine in a military way, or they really do this self-fulfilling prophecy of, Russia is going to attack us in, I don't know, 5 years or 10 years, then everything will be over. There will be a war that will not be contained only on the European continent, I am afraid. When I discuss these global affairs with my colleagues, I'm a member of No Cold War Collective, and we have our weekly meetings every Monday, and we discuss different bad things that are happening in our parts of the world. I usually try to remind my friends from different continents that Europe is like a time bomb. Europe has always been the troublemaker. Of course, we located the source of power in Washington and the hyper-imperialism and all that. But Europe is really still burdened by its inglorious past, and it's now rushing into a new catastrophe. And I don't know where did this Nobel Peace Prize go in the meantime. We remember that European Union is a holder of a Nobel Peace Prize. But of course, many other war criminals are having that award. So we should not pay much attention to that. But anyway, it is our duty to deconstruct this way. And up to some point, I believe to this group of people who were struggling for different Europe, for democratic Europe, for democratization, actually, of this European Union that is completely, as you rightly pointed out, it is without democratic legitimacy. They have only the European Parliament based on direct electoral vote of the citizens. No other institution is responsible or control on the check and balances by the people. We should really pay attention what's going on on our continent, because the past doesn't speak well about its responsibility for the continent and for the rest of the world. So I would not really expect emancipatory power or vision or movement. Unfortunately, what hurts me the most as a leftist is that I cannot see the left forces in Europe. We do have a small left-wing party, far left-wing party, let's put it that way, in Macedonia. But it is so demonized. It is made to sound worse than, I don't know, Nazi party or something like that. So this, when we were talking about this political configuration in Europe, and far right, as you mentioned, these neo-Nazis and all that, it is because the so-called conservatives, these people's parties at European level, and the social democrats, they were occupying all the time the center, the political center. So the difference between them is like between Coca-Cola and Pepsi, as someone would say about American political parties. But each time the far right would push and demand more, these parties would adjust to these pushes, these inputs, these initiatives from the ground to satisfy that part of electorate. And then going further to the right, to the right, to the right, and we don't know now what is right and what is far right. And to make things more interesting, for example, the whole euphoria about Viktor Orban losing the elections brought to a situation in which the Hungarian parliament is made only of right-wing parties. Even when the minor partner is a far right. So there is not a single parliamentarian coming even from the center or I don't know, some social democratic background, nothing. So that is really one of the ironies that we were talking about. So things were really going with some dynamics, especially I'm looking now from a completely forgotten part of the southeastern Europe, or let's say European periphery. Speaking here about Hungary, as I mentioned, but also Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, and the rest of the countries on the territory of former Yugoslavia, Albania, Greece, of course. So if you have an overview of the region, you see that things are really getting worse day by day in each of these countries, and in general as a region, as a part of Europe, of this complex story that we were talking about. Then I don't have a good prognosis for the future of Europe.
I'm seeing, even with what happened here in Italy last weekend, with a young man who drove his car into people in Modena, that this has been displayed by the media as an incredibly troubling event, which it is, but the media has taken up racist tactics. He was represented in Italian media as of Maghreban origin, of Moroccan origin, and even as a foreigner. He's born and raised here in Italy. Born and raised here. His beef, although one should not take a car about such issues to people, he was very upset about what is a well-known problem in Italy, the job force, the lack of jobs. He studied. He did years of study, and like many Italians, finds himself without work. Again, not advocating that you mow people down because of this. What I am talking about, though, is the fact that Italian media glossed over all of it. They chose not to discuss what the real issue is here, is great concern and anger by many Italians, not just in the younger generation, about being unemployed and facing an uncertain future. And this is the kind of stuff that is driving some rather xenophobic narratives around the country, where on the one hand, it's very good and well for Brussels to make pronouncements about immigration, but the ports of entry are not Brussels. They're Greece, Italy, Spain. And so we're having this kind of frontier war being fought by the people who are not the ones in power making decisions on the one hand, and on the other, well, I saw what happened with the euro and the birth of the euro in Italy and how that changed from the early 2000s the face of Italian livelihoods and the economy. So none of this is being addressed seriously. Instead, we can find one story after the other about how this man, Al-Qudri, was a person of Moroccan origin. And the intonation on these stories is, of course, the same Islamophobic rhetoric. And when you go to Twitter and Facebook, it's even worse. That's why we should get rid of Muslims. Anyone who's a Muslim should not be allowed in this country. And this is what Italians are saying. I'm alarmed by the racism, but not surprised. You have witnessed the 1990 wars in Yugoslavia, and you often cite and refer to these wars as it being a testing ground for modern Western interventionism. Now, we've had a kidnapping of a sitting leader of Venezuela. We've witnessed a very botched attempt to do regime change in Iran, with Iran coming out looking quite strong. We've seen the coalescing of BRICS nations together, including, and we can't forget South Africa here, which has rightfully taken to the international court, the ICC and the ICJ, Israel to task for its genocide. In the past year, from last May, we have 1 year where international scholars are in agreement that what is taking place in Gaza is a genocide. We're seeing more and more support coming forth for South Africa's statement and legal action against Israel. Other countries are joining forces. The BRICS countries are presenting an alternative to US and Western hegemony. What lessons can be learned from the 1990s wars in Yugoslavia as they are being currently applied by the US in the Middle East and Ukraine?
That is a long story, a painful one for me, because some of the things while Yugoslavia was falling apart were unbelievable to us, living here. We were watching the news and we could not believe our eyes, and it looked like all of a sudden some bloody historical feedback, and we were talking about this not dealing with the past, and some of my colleagues used to say that the decades of existence of Yugoslavia, socialist Yugoslavia, because there was first this kingdom of Yugoslavia, and then after the Second World War, the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, that was just a ceasefire between two wars. In general, that the roots of these deep ethnic animosities, hostilities, and hatred, and blah blah, was somewhere deep into family histories and revised official histories that we had these complex stories about Ustasha in Croatia and Chetniks in Serbia, and actually interethnic war within this partisan movement and fight against the Nazis and Italian forces, Italian occupation too. So we really didn't take that easily. To see one country falling apart is a very painful experience, and probably that's why I am so sensitive when I see attacks on other countries and wishing them the same destiny that we went through. Macedonia was even happy in that respect, because we left without the war. The war arrived 10 years later after the NATO bombardment of second Yugoslavia or third Yugoslavia, actually, Serbia and Montenegro. How to summarize the lessons learned? Nothing was learned. Actually, the moment when I think that I don't want to go there to talk about Yugoslavia and the reasons, but I cannot avoid saying that Germany was also crucial in the destruction of Yugoslavia. Support for the separatist forces, nationalist forces, especially in Slovenia, Croatia, this more advanced and more developed parts of former Yugoslavia, and they were running on that idea of Europe now. So we should just leave this outdated socialist federation and join Europe, join European Union, because we are real Europeans, while these others, Serbs, Montenegrins, Macedonians, Kosovars, they're all, belonging to Ottoman Empire. So it was a sort of a civilizational conflict that they presented. Even I don't accept that version. Anyway, European Union was directly responsible. At that time, it was still European Community, let me be precise. So it was directly responsible for the violent destruction of Yugoslavia. If Yugoslavia had to disintegrate, fine, but it could have been done without blood. But not. It was just left to some incompetent and some greedy personalities. So, okay. When everything started getting more and more complicated, for Slovenia was easy, for Croatia so, but then Bosnia was a real tragedy because of three nations living in the same republic. Then Kosovo issue that was with long, deep roots, historical roots. And the moment when NATO, actually United States, decided to, let's say, resolve the problem with Kosovo Albanians and launched the NATO intervention in 1999 without approval of the UN Security Council, that was the moment when the international, how we say, legal-based order, this funny formula. It was joke from that moment on, and I remember that it was the 50th anniversary of NATO. They celebrated it in Washington with a new doctrine that read, out of area, out of business. So we have to go out of our borders, and this idea of military alliance that is for self-defense and collective defense, it was left. So they were seeking a new business, and Yugoslavia appeared in a perfect moment for them. So they had to prove that they are necessary, they are here to help and to intervene for humanitarian reasons, alleged humanitarian reasons. I'm not saying that the Kosovo Albanians did not suffer, but it's a little bit more complex than that because it had deep roots, as I mentioned. But still, nobody should have allowed this huge military force to attack a country that was not a threat to NATO or to anybody else in Europe. They could have intervened in different ways, but the war was in the cards. Even these, I don't know, these younger generations are too young to remember, but we know that there were some sort of negotiations of the Serbs and Kosovo Albanians in Rambouillet and then in Paris. It was all a sham, just like Minsk agreements and many other that were just a charade. Because the military engagement was already, the military staff was ready to act. So we knew that there would be a military intervention. So even if we now ignore what happened with Yugoslavia, that later on became Serbia and Montenegro, and then Kosovo declared its independence due to the American support, and they even wrote the constitution of this former, actually, part of Serbia. And gave it independence, and later on argued that Russia annexed Crimea. So we see, how things are interrelated into this world that is not so big. So one thing led to another, and now we come to this position that we have the leader of the mightiest military power saying, I don't need international law because I'm responsible only to my moral conscience, or how was that sentence of Trump? I don't remember exactly, but it sounded Kantian, just the moral law and the starry sky above myself. So I don't need international law. I don't need international constraints. He doesn't need the diplomacy. I just heard interesting information I didn't know about that over 100 countries in the world has no ambassadors, US ambassadors in full capacity, working. So United States don't need embassies already. So they can, as you said, kidnap a president or do whatever they want. They could declare, I don't know, Venezuela as one of the federal states, or Greenland, or so. It is really, really some sort of craziness and hysteria that is hard to explain, but always going backwards and seeing this historical situation show us that nothing happened all at a sudden. At the moment when the world in general did not oppose strongly the NATO intervention, it was not about Serbia, it was not about Kosovo, it was about international law, about the principles of use of force. And NATO did actually a war crime, and nobody was responsible for that. There were civilian victims. And now when we see for example, Americans targeting schools in Iran or hospitals, it was not the first time. Of course, it was done in Serbia. They bombed the media, the state television, while the journalists were doing their job. They were broadcasting the news when they bombed the building. They bombed the civilian traffic infrastructure, the railways, the bridge in Novi Sad, and many examples. Nobody paid really attention because the whole media story was, we have to save Albanians from this dictator, and Milosevic is like Saddam Hussein, he's a butcher in the Balkans, and the same old story, the Hitler in the Balkans and all that. So for me, that was somehow a turning point. And I had an interesting opportunity to be a part of, let's say, delegation of Yugoslav intellectuals that visited United States in 2000. So it was just 1 year after the NATO intervention. And on our program, we had a meeting with some important people in the United Nations. So they were, at the first moment, they would probably expect us to disagree among ourselves because we come from these bloody Balkans. But actually, we understood each other very well, and we all had this position that I am now arguing. And at one point, when we opposed their official version about K4 mission, UNMIK mission in Kosovo and doing good job, peace building, blah, blah, we confronted them with the story, what about NATO intervention and without UN Security Council? And that was a very, very interesting moment for me personally. I will never forget that when, you see the official getting out of his shoes, official shoes, and he starts speaking as a human being. And he was surrounded with some of his associates here, and they were trying to give counter arguments to our, opposition. And he said, I'm quoting, "Bullshit, shut up, let's be honest and admit. In spring of 1999, in this huge building here in New York, we believed that it's over with international law, that we are over, that there will be closing down of UN, as such, because it was so unbelievable audacity to attack a country that was not threatening anybody with full military force, this bombardment mission and all that. So that was a moment of honesty of an official who actually admitted that UN were failure. Very often I get back to that moment whenever I see these futile sessions of UN Security Council or UN General Assembly more and more often, because the UN Security Council is even incapacitated to function as a body. And I am really getting back to that memory because, those who haven't been there and seen in reality how huge, not the building, but the number of offices, the number of people employed by UN. I'm talking about, people of different levels in this administration, not only about the Secretary General and the ambassadors and all that. I'm talking about the officials. And I'm talking this because my former husband used to work for UN agency, and I knew that my children got scholarships to study in any university in the world due to his position. So it comes, naturally. You get a job with UN and you have some privileges in addition to your good salary. You get scholarships for your children and I don't know what other privileges. So as I was going through these halls and the elevators and all that, I was just, counting how many people were using various privileges in that organization. And at the end of the day, they would not deliver peace. Now, maybe I sound too harsh because there are agencies, humanitarian missions, who really, especially let's mention the one in Lebanon these days and in Gaza for more than 1,000 days. So some people are really working hard job on the ground, and I have high respect for that job. But for this administration and for the political impotence of UN, I am losing respect and I am losing hope that they would ever be a factor that would have some kind of not power, but at least ability to change things, to impose some rules of engagement and peace building and all these matters. So it seems that as I grow older and I see all these horrible things around the world, I get more cynical toward peace research, UN as such, the UN Charter. So all that sounds like excellent prose and Gandhian things and all that. But in reality, I see that people and children get killed while we are making this interview. So it's really hard to keep hope in that organization. On the other hand, the other argument would be, what else we have at hand? Can we just give up UN and what's next? You mentioned BRICS several times during our talk. It is a hard job. It is a hard job. We may be we who would like to see this new world order finally taking shape. We would like to see the changes faster. And with more effect on the ground, and with some results. So far, we are still seeing some discrepancies, some dissonant positions, or lack of trust among, especially the leading members of this. How to say? It's not alliance. It is more like soft sort of organization, let's put it that way. It's fluid. It's people. Actually, the members are. Recently, there was a ministerial meeting that failed to come up with a final statement, with a common position over the issues they discussed. So we are following, the behavior of China, of Russia, and then what's India doing? Is it fair? They are collaborating with Israel against Iran. Iran is a member of BRICS. So Saudi Arabia, that is somewhere in between. And so it's very, very hard, very, very time consuming, and probably we need to go through this catharsis, to this climax of craziness, of lunacy in the world to see some shape. So I think it is important to work on various models and fields, and even bilateral, improving bilateral relations or regional oasis, some sort of forms of cooperation on small parts of the world would be good examples. So I don't know, maybe even I'm getting back to this memory of Xi Jinping and Donald Trump's meeting, when you see that even the rivals can find some formula, let's say, even though Trump is Trump, going back home, doing what Trump is doing. So I don't know. It is very, very hard to make any prognosis. But as we said, we have to keep our ability to be active, to at least promote what is good and what is better than this disaster that we are living in. and to try to change the world even in small steps, even in very, very tiny small steps. I don't know, and to resist, of course, not to capitulate in terms of our intellectual engagement, in our psychological. We are all human beings. We suffer. We have our own crises, but of course, we have to continue working what we do, and to hope that some other generations maybe may be better than us, because we failed them.
Yes, but there are problems about what we do to resist this now, because as you and I have seen in recent months and years, there have been now several No Kings marches. But these are very amorphous political or even apolitical manifestations, because they seem to be about denigrating the persona of Trump, and there is nothing of substance to them. I'm very worried because the United States is in the throes of the decline of its power, politically, even civilizationally. And I don't think Americans have really woken up and smelled the coffee on this one. It's over. Instead of looking for ways to reach across the aisle and foment very important bonds that have to do with our drinking water, housing, education, things that are falling apart, we are seeing people get together, purity posturing their hatred of Trump. And I think that is going to end badly, because it seems that the pseudo-left, these neoliberals, have no political vision whatsoever. The far left has very little power. And then the people making more inroads to dialogue with the working classes are people on the soft right, center to some degree, libertarians, obviously Ron Paul. But then when you start to look at media figures, there are a lot of people who have shifted their former views on the right. I think of Tucker Carlson, who has repented many times for his support of Iraq too, but who has also been talking about, since lockdown, the working class, the inability of people to get out and protest mandatory vaccines, the autonomy of our bodies, right? So I'm very worried, Biljana, that we're facing some very dystopian fronts on many sides, not just what's happening in Europe or what's happening in the Middle East or in Sudan and Gaza, or even the question mark. We haven't heard from former, or is he the sitting Venezuelan leader and his wife in prison somewhere in Brooklyn. It's almost as if it's been accepted that the US can behave as an Orwellian state. No Western country has really done something about that, with the exception of Spain speaking out both on that and on Gaza. What do you see as this kind of political purity posturing on behalf of the pseudo-left Americans? And what would you say is a better way of organizing? Because I don't think they're really understanding the writing on the wall here.
It will be very pretentious of me to speak from the Balkans and to give advice to Americans how to organize themselves, because I'm failing here in a very tiny country to do something. I'm also minority in this country with my positions and my leftist ideology and fight. I fully agree that when I hear, some of our media, local, regional media, they take, for example, articles, translate from Western media and so on. And whenever I meet the word left, I am really I'm laughing, by use of that word in a very funny situation when I cannot see real left in United States. What we see in Europe is already discussed. It's also very weak, very confused, fractions of different sort, leftists fighting leftists and all that. It is a product of this long domination of this Western liberal individualist philosophy that you are alone, you have the American dream, so you fight, work hard, start with 1/4, and then you will become a millionaire or something. So it is a long tradition of brainwashing through educational system, first of all, through the media, through this entertainment industry and all that. So we have to have some, how to say, understanding. I'm not approving, but I understand how it comes. This no movement is a fun, it's a joke, it's some sort of, I would say, sometimes when I see some of these actions in United States of the opposition, let's say, let's put it that way, I say the colored revolution got back home. Because they were for years exporting democracy around the world by bombs or by regime changes, and my country was one of them. When the regime was changed through a colored revolution that looked very spectacular, democratic, enthusiastic, young people on the streets and all that, already seen scenario. But now, going back to United States, it's a joke. It speaks about this polarization between the two camps that actually are not so much different in general terms, in terms of domestic policy or foreign policy. So it simply doesn't matter who sits in the White House, even though it is a concern that a lunatic may use the red button. That's a legitimate concern. But talking about the activism and the radical change and all that, I don't know, it is often a dilemma. Many people like us ask, how is it possible that bad guys get better organized among themselves than the good guys and people who want genuine change for good, for justice, for equality and all, empathy, solidarity among the people, that it is really unbelievable. But I think it is about the lack of any collective thought about collective rights or collective future or collectivity as such, in terms of individual versus collective, is demonized. It is it's a scare of communism, of socialism. They're so far from all that they don't have to worry. They still need to make the first steps in terms of organizing, I don't know, trade unions and real, genuine, even one single issue movements. I don't know. But then we have this problem of how to say, organizing in long run and elimination of this idea that I am the most important and my family is only important, not my neighbor, not my collective and all that. But I have to add here something that often I also find myself surprised that I am in a way westernized as under this influence. But, the left movements and real solidarity and transformative forces can be found in places where one would hardly believe that they exist. The experience I have with No Cold War Collective is such, because we come from different continents, from different countries, different cultures, And currently, for example, Vijay Prashad has been on a tour through Africa and visiting these leftist organizations, movements, and so on. So through his testimonies, first-hand testimonies, one can see that we are so self-absorbed. When I say we, I think the Westerners. So we look only at ourselves, and we are, of course, desperate about this poor state of affairs. But on the other side, there is the rest of the world, the majority, and things are happening, different moods, different activities, protest, courage, personal courage to go out and to oppose the police and all that, and still to believe in something. It is something that I think Americans never experienced, Europeans here and there. But for me, for example, it was a real intellectual and how to say personal enrichment. Last year in November, I was in Shanghai, where we had the Global Academic Forum of Global South Academic Forum. And when we ended with all our, how to say, blasphemic speeches and analysis of the global affairs, more than 500 people, you can imagine, a huge hall of people from all over the world. We ended the event singing the International. And that was so emotional moment for me, I have to say, because that was a moment when you feel you're not alone. You belong to humanity. You belong to a group of people who share similar concerns, worries. We are all humans. And that is the tragedy of the West. Instead of, you mentioned the key word, actually, working class. Instead of this class consciousness, I mean, what makes us human? It is our social life, our being as human beings, and it is how I understand the left idea. They introduce different ways of identities, identity formation. So we divide among ourselves, I don't know, along ethnic lines, religious lines, gender lines, I don't know. It is only about the division, not about, solidarity, not about getting together. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't have exact answers, but as Soviet Union was born in almost feudal country after the October Revolution. It was a hard, painful process, not always with good results. Let's be honest. But still, the socialist revolution took place in the least developed part of Europe or world, whatever we say about USSR. So maybe nowadays we should expect these dramatic changes starting also not in the West, not as Marx believed that it would, this discrepancy between production forces and the super structure get into and the class consciousness and all that get into clash, and that produces naturally this transformation, revolution. Maybe we should just give up that the West is still immature, so self-absorbed into its own grandiose beliefs of civilizational achievement or whatever. So maybe we should just follow the other parts of the world and learn from them. I don't know. Maybe that is the way how to get back hope that changes are possible. So yeah, here I will again mention China.